Okay, so the promises that were made earlier, of course, we got chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, where the initial promise is given to Abraham. He would have a land, he would be made a nation, and he would be a blessing to all mankind through his seed. And of course, that promise becomes a kind of theme for the whole Bible, doesn't it? God's giving blessing, spiritual blessing, salvation, really, through the seed of Abraham, who was Jesus Christ, who came to be Jesus Christ. In Genesis 15, we read this, and I think this is important too. God said to Abram, "Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs." And that's where the story of Genesis really winds up, is with the children of Israel in Goshen, which is an area in what we would call northern Egypt. And the people, of course, grow into a nationality there over a long period of time. Decades, centuries actually, they were there growing up. So know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs and will serve them. They would serve the Egyptians, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward, they'll come out with great possessions. So God would bring them out of Egypt, ready to be identified nationally. And we'll talk about that in the book of Exodus. I did want to point out this verse in Genesis chapter 32. And this is where God said, "Your name is Jacob." So he's referring to Jacob now. "Your name is Jacob. Your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel shall be your name." So he called his name Israel. And that's where the national name comes about at that point in their history. So you can watch as we go through the story of Joseph, these key elements will come up in terms of God's promise, and you'll never be allowed to forget as you study Genesis what the theme of it is as we go along. Okay? Now, in Genesis chapter 37, where we start, we're told of some dreams that Joseph has. The thing you want to remember is this is not a situation where Joseph eats too much popcorn right before he goes to bed or something. This is God speaking to him. And I would remind you, as the book of Hebrews opens, which we're going to study with Ray, right? Hebrews. God, who at sundry times and in different manners spake in time past unto the fathers. You see, he spoke in dreams to them. And these dreams that we are referring to all speak to God's providence and God's promises to them and what God was doing with them. So God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners, not like he has spoken to us. See, he has spoken to us in his Son, Jesus Christ. He spoke to them in dreams and in other ways. So these dreams become critical in the book of Genesis. And we'll see that here. His brothers' sheaves bowed down to Joseph's sheaf. What's a sheaf? A bundle. That's a good word for it, a bundle of grain, like we would take and bale hay. They would gather these sheaves and tie them together. So the brothers each had one, and Joseph had one, and the brothers' sheaves bowed down to Joseph's. That's one of the earlier dreams in Joseph's experience with his brothers, and the jealousy that comes out of that is going to be important in the story. In chapter 37, the sun, the moon, and the stars all bow down to Joseph. And the sun is who? The father. And the moon is the mother, and the stars are the brothers. And when Joseph interprets that to the boys, then here we go again with their jealousy, you see. So that's chapter 37, and that kind of begins the story. Of course, earlier we had Joseph being born into the family, and who was his mother? Who? Rachel. And what number child is Joseph? 11. Oh, we're doing good. So Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. You all are good. That's good. Probably next up, if you all can get your songs ready, will be the Ten Commandments. We'll need to learn the Ten Commandments in order next quarter in our study. Okay, so Genesis chapter 37 begins that way. The brothers' resentment develops, and I thought I'd just give you this very quickly here. Joseph is sent from home at Hebron, is where he was with Jacob, and he went to find his brothers, and he traveled to Shechem. That's about 60 miles distance he had to go, and then he went on to Dothan. That's not Dothan, Alabama, incidentally. Watch that. And then the brothers conspired to kill Joseph, of course. And we're moving very quickly through the story as we go here. But Reuben intervened. They did not kill Joseph. They threw him into a pit and kept him. It appears in the story they didn't really realize what they would do or have a plan at first. They just threw him in this pit, and these Midianites come along, tradesmen apparently, and they turn Joseph over to them. And they're the ones who take him down into Egypt. The Midianites paid 20 pieces of silver Not so much, actually. The brothers deceived Jacob with this bloody coat. That takes you back to the story of the coat of many colors. So I'm just reminding you of stories you all know very well. Then Joseph was taken to Egypt, and he was sold to Potiphar to be a servant in his house. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. We'll come back to it. We're going to have an intervening story here. This all begins the predicted Egyptian experience that God had told Jacob about, that there would be a 400-year captivity, basically, in Egypt at that point. So all of this leads to that. And that provides the opportunity for the people of Israel to be kind of brought together in a way. It seems a strange way to do that, but the Israelites are collected in Egypt, not in the Promised Land. The stories we have of God's people in Israel have them divided when they're in the Promised Land. They're divided between Abraham and Lot, for example. They'll be divided later in Judah and the southern tribes, and Israel in the northern tribes. While the Israelites are in their own land, they're often divided. They're all together as a people in Goshen, down in Egypt, aren't they? Which is just kind of an interesting thought I thought I would throw out to you, let you think about that a bit. But they do grow into a nation of people together, of thousands of people, thousands and thousands, maybe millions, maybe a couple million go out in the Exodus, So it's very interesting to note that. Now, there is something thrown in here in chapter 38 that is an interesting story tied to our theme. And, last week we asked, well, why did God, in chapter 34, why did he tell us all this about Shechem? Well, because it's going to have an impact on how God fulfills his promises. Why did he tell us about Reuben and Tamar? Well, you'd think it's an immoral story, it's a personal story, but it impacts the direction of God's providence. And so it's told. This one is told that way too. The boys, after selling Joseph to the Midianites, who took him away, are pretty much on their own at this point, and Judah separates from them, goes off from them. He left his brothers. He married a Canaanite woman named Shua, and they had 3 sons, and Onan and Shelah. And they grow up. At least the first 2 of them grow up before this happens. So we're talking a period of probably 20 years, close to that, or maybe more. I'm not sure how long that this period is. But Judah is separate from his brothers at this time. And so the story goes that was given Tamar to be his wife. He was an evil man, and the Bible just says God slew him. Doesn't really say much about what his evil was or what he had done. His wife is given to Onan. Tamar is given to the second son to be his wife. That kind of comes before the law of Moses, of course. The law of Moses had a levirate law, we call it, that ordered this transfer of the wife to the brother in the case of the death of the first son, her first husband. So God had instructions for him to give her a child in his brother's name. Onan didn't do that. God was displeased with him and struck him down in all of this. The third brother was never given to Tamar. And even after he was grown, he was not given to her. And she, apparently seeking a child, deceives Judah and causes him, with his consent obviously, to give her a child. And this is all a kind of a immoral story. Prostitution involved by Tamar, seeking a prostitute by Judah. So it's a very bad story as it relates to them. But in the process of it, now see, here's where we have to have the story. Why is this in the book? Because she has twins, and the older twin comes as the child of Judah next to come down to Christ ultimately. You see. So Perez, the older of the twins, that she bears to Judah, and Judah is going to be the father of the tribe that Jesus comes out of, you see. So Perez becomes the son of Judah through whom Jesus came. So that's why we have this story, apparently. It's interesting. It's kind of challenging. You just think these stories are not good stories. And you wonder, why would God put that in the Bible? And this is why. Apparently, it's the best we can know why, at least. God would include these stories in the text. So that's chapter 38 for us as we go. All right, now Joseph goes down into Egypt. He is sold to the captain of Pharaoh's guard, and he becomes elevated in the house in terms of the master's approval, and he becomes the overseer of the house. Joseph is harassed by Potiphar's wife, attempted to seduction in the house. He is then on the outs with her, and she convinces her husband that he tried to get to her. The wife is believed, and Joseph is thrown into jail. I have put you a little note on your slide, just again, something for you to think about. His garment is the evidence, the physical evidence that his wife produces for her case against him with her husband is Joseph's coat. This is not the coat of many colors. This is the second coat that we have. And it becomes the evidence against him. All right? Are we good so far? So he is thrown in jail. And this provides the opportunity for more dreams. We're back to God speaking now to them, prophesying really in these dreams. And so in the jail, the royal butler who has been jailed has a dream. He dreams of a vine that has grown up. And this vine produces grapes. It's a grapevine. And he squeezes the grapes and he gives it to the Pharaoh. So in the dream, he is seen as providing for the Pharaoh his drink, in this case. What does that symbolize? What do you think? What is God saying? That's right. If this butler is giving drink to Pharaoh, then he's had to have been restored to his position. So it's a kind of a logical thing there. Now, this butler is going to have a responsibility in the story. He should later talk to Pharaoh in behalf of Joseph. Will he? Yes, but not for quite a while. I think that's right. The first answer is no. He forgets and he doesn't do it. But yes, eventually, when other circumstances get right, he will. So God is going to see to this now. This is providence. God's prophesying this in this dream. Now, the baker in the story, 3 baskets of baked goods, the birds eat them. What is that going to say? Not good. It's not good for the baker. The baker will not be released, and he would be put to death 3 days after his dream that he has. So we get other stories here. Eventually, who will have a dream? Pharaoh will have a dream. And his dream is going to be that there will be these 7 emaciated cows, skinny cows that will eat up 7 fat cows. And what do the cows represent? Years. They represent years in the economic condition of Egypt, don't they? And the 7 skinny cows, we're calling them, what do they represent? Years of famine. Lean years, we'll call that. So the 7 skinny cows represent 7 lean years in the economic welfare as a result of famine in the land. Right? So that's the way that will go. And then the 7 fat cows represent good years, right? Productive years in their agricultural development in Egypt. So we have years of plenty and years of famine. That leads us to Joseph's revelation of God's meaning to this dream. And see, he gets his position now as a direct result of God's revealing the dreams and their meaning to Joseph. So, who is behind all this? God is behind all this, you see, as we'll see in a minute. And that's what we're doing. We have to go over these stories very quickly in a class like this, but it all comes back to the one thing of God's motivating all of this and ultimately to fulfilling his promise. You see, that's the key. Joseph rises to power up in chapter 41. So God's providence for Joseph and God's family, the future Israel, is going to be taken care of as we go along. Now, in chapter 41, toward the end of this chapter, is something very interesting that I want you to notice. And this, you need to mark this, I think, some of this at least in your Bible, just so you can catch it when you reread this. Don't just read over this. Joseph is elevated to second position, really, in the government of Egypt. And what did Pharaoh do? Well, Pharaoh gave Joseph his signet ring, which was a ring apparently particularly his, the Pharaoh's, by which he could authorize documents. He could stamp documents with this ring, or he could show the ring and assert authority with the use of the ring. So Pharaoh gave him that. He gave him a gold chain to put around his neck. Pharaoh clothed Joseph in a royal linen garment. There's his coat number 3, isn't it, in the story. Pharaoh had Joseph ride in the second royal chariot, right up close to his. And he ordered the people to bow down to him. And he gave him a new name. Joseph was named Zaphenath Paneah. First part of that means he speaks. That is, he's given authority. He speaks and lives. I think those who obey him live, is the idea. So Joseph's name is given with authority. And Pharaoh gives him a wife. And I want you to notice now, I'll just do this very quickly, but Asenath is her name, or some pronounce it Asenath. Asenath is given to be Joseph's wife. She is the daughter of Potipharah. Now, that's not Potiphar, but it's Potipharah, and isn't that interesting? Who was Potiphar? That's his first boss in the land, isn't it? That's his master to whom he is sold when he is sent into the land, Potiphar. The priest of On. Now, On is the name of a city or a town, but it was at On, the chief god is Re in Egypt. The sun god was the god Re. He is the priest of On. Apparently, then, the high priest of the land. He would be like, let's see, where have you been? The Canterbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury or something. He would have been in Egypt to what the Archbishop of Canterbury would be in England, where you've been, right? So, he gives to Joseph the daughter of the high priest over the religion, the highest position in the religion of Egypt, to be his wife. You see? Joseph will marry her. They will have two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who will be the fathers of two of the tribes of Israel. Now, who would imagine that? That Joseph's wife would be the daughter. So if I could do my lesson with you, I'd talk about whether she was converted or not converted, or what's her role in all of this, which is really kind of an interesting study in itself. But what we get here is, with all these gifts that Pharaoh gives to Joseph, the ultimate gift is going to be his wife, with whom he has sons who become patriarchs. Can you imagine that? And that's what happens here. Any question you want to mention about that? Anybody? Israelites. It does, doesn't it? Interesting aside, but it's clear in the text that she's mentioned a couple of times just as the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh, and Joseph's wife. Not much else told about her, except that she was the daughter of the priest of On. His name was Potipharah. Okay, well, Joseph's brothers in another famine come down to Egypt in our story. All the future tribes are involved, except Benjamin stays home until later. The brothers are recognized by Joseph. They're accused of being spies. So to prove their sincerity, Joseph demands that they bring Benjamin down to Egypt. Simeon, the second son, is taken as security. Reuben, the first son, takes responsibility for Benjamin at home with Jacob and argues the case for bringing Benjamin down. Judah gets involved and finally convinces Jacob to let Benjamin go. So that's just a brief overview of that part of the story. But this is getting the family down into Egypt, where God's promise about their slavery and the 400 years will be fulfilled. When Joseph finally reveals himself to them, there's a lot of weeping. There's a lot of fear. Can you imagine the emotion when this is all revealed? When Joseph tells them who he is, see, they don't recognize him at first down in Egypt. And I wish we could have a video to show you of how this went. But Joseph, 4 times in the brief comments that are made, acknowledges God's role in all of this. And so you want to read in chapter 45, verses 5 through 9. And again, this is a place you may want to mark in your Bible for a special identification. God sent me before you to preserve life, he says in verse 5. In verse 7, he says, God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you, for these boys, for their seed. It was not you who sent me here, but God, he says in verse 8. And in verse 9, he says, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. So 4 times he identifies the real source of what's happened. Then we have, toward the end of their life, a kind of a settlement. Jacob and the family settle in Goshen. I should have brought a map, I guess, to show you. It's up in the delta region of Egypt, up toward the Mediterranean Sea. And they settled there. Jacob lived there for 70 years. There are going to be 70 people come down there. 66 original persons are named in the text, plus Joseph and Asenath and the 2 boys. So it makes 70 total that we start with. We come out with multiples of 1 million maybe in the book of Exodus later. Now then, in the last 2 chapters of Genesis, there are the special blessings that Jacob gives to his boys right before he dies. And there are two big surprises that take place in this. In chapter 49, Joseph brings his two sons up to Jacob. And he puts Ephraim on the right and Manasseh on the left. Did I get that right or did I? No, Joseph puts Manasseh first on the right and Ephraim on the left. And Jacob shifts them so that the blessing is going to come to the younger of the two. What does that remind you of? Jacob and Esau. And Jacob does that to his grandsons. Big surprise, Joseph is not pleased. And then when he goes through the boys, Jacob gives the blessing not to Reuben. Why? Because he took his father's woman. And not to Simeon and Levi. Why? Because of the violence at Shechem. And that brings you down to Judah. And he gives the blessing to Judah, and he says that he would be blessed till Shiloh comes. And Shiloh was representative of the Messiah, the fulfillment of the big promise to Abraham. You see. So the story closes with Jacob leading to Judah for the fulfillment of the promise. And you get it all the way through. It's an amazing story, isn't it? Genesis is an amazing book. And you just must remember all the direction of the purpose of it. Sure. That is. Yeah, Joseph becomes the righteous direction of God's people. He really does. Yeah. Okay. Been good to do this with you. I've enjoyed it very much. I hope you've enjoyed and getting to know these characters like we have. And we'll see a few more characters when we get into Exodus.